Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
Alex.
As always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please join our community by subscribing to us on the socials. Our handle on all platforms is at N2E Fantasy. We are also available on all major podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
On this episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, we are covering league news as we always do, basically each episode, and we will continue the 2024 rookie breakdown leading up to the draft, and this one will be the very robust wide receiver position. So I'll break down my top 20 and start from reverse order, work my way up to number one. And this, of course, is just the prospects. It's not even dynasty rankings yet, which we'll do after the draft. So, Jeff, what do we have for news this week?
So, the Chargers signed another former Raven in running back J.K. Dobbins as he goes from John Harbaugh to Jim Harbaugh. The running back is coming off an Achilles tear. Sorry, I misspoke there. Do you think that Dobbins will be ready to go for the season? Do you think this means that he'll resume being ahead of Gus Edwards? Or do you think Gus Edwards is the preferred starter going into the season? It's really interesting that they went from John to Jim, and they're kind of staying in the family per se here.
Yeah, I think they're just there temporarily. I almost think the starter is not even on the roster yet because I'm convinced he's going to draft Blake Corum at some point in the draft. Bring him back from the Michigan days. But I think those are obviously low risk signings, and I think those are the best places for those two guys to potentially get playing time in the league. I don't feel good about taking them in any fantasy draft. So unless you get them really late in like a best ball league right now. But
That is true.
I don't. It doesn't move the needle for me. I've never been in on either of those guys.
I will be picking J.K. Dobbins over Gus Edwards, but it's not by much. And this may be another. I do think that these will be the two starting running backs going into the year. They were the starters for the last 4 years in Baltimore, so why wouldn't they just continue their little trend over here in Los Angeles? But this might be another trend of me wanting to take the later of the two running backs. Same with Pollard and Spears, and there's a few other scenarios like Moss and
Chase
Chase
Brown.
Yes. I always got, is Evans the other guy that's there? I always got them a little bit confused because they didn't get a lot of hype last year with Joe Mixon around. But yeah, Joe Mixon is with your Texans now, so that's a big piece of why that we'd have to decide between those two running backs. But
So obviously, if it's later of the two, that means you're taking Dameon Pierce this year, right?
yeah, I saw you traded him away in a dynasty league. I was going to call you out on it, but that means that you're throwing in the white flag on him. So tried to get you to do that last year and couldn't quite get you to that point.
I traded him for what I felt like was decent value. It's not like I got
Absolutely.
trash for him.
Right. Absolutely. Speaking of trash, the Cowboys sign perennial free agent running back Royce Freeman. I believe he had a few starts with the Rams last year, and he had a few starts with the Texans the last years before that. Is he the starter right now, or don't you believe the starter is on that roster yet?
I don't think the starter's on the roster yet.
Whoa.
None of the three guys inspire me much, and I think that the Cowboys will be drafting a running back for certainty.
So you're not a Deuce Vaughn guy,
No,
right?
I know you are, but he's a little too small to carry the load.
Yeah, we'll see what they do. It will be interesting, and there'll be a team to watch for in the draft at running back. Now, we have a couple of wide receivers that have fifth-year options exercised for next year, and that is Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins and Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, not only did Devonta Smith get his fifth-year option picked up, but they also signed him to a 3-year, $75 million extension. The extension, so the option runs in 2020. The extension runs from 2026 to 2020. Now, you'll know in the past, I've been very clear that teams do not pay a quarterback and two wide receivers at the same time. And there is a very likely chance that either Hurts which I know you believe, or AJ Brown, which I believe could be off the roster before this deal kind of kicks into place. But there is also a chance that Smith and Brown making $50 million a year might seem like chump change if the salary cap continues to go up. So there is that option as well. Oh, right. Do you find either of those to be puzzling, or do you feel like they're both warranted, the fifth year option?
They're both warranted, and I think at some point they will end up being the number one receivers on those teams.
Yeah, so you think Waddle's there for the long haul too?
I think so. And Tyreek Hill's already said that he's got a limited time and then he wants to retire, which is he's still fairly young
End of
for
his
an
deal.
NFL player. So, and I know you think AJ Brown could be on the move in the next year or two.
Yeah, he could be another Stephon Diggs scenario. Just got the quarterback up off the ground, and then you move on from the guy that calls for the ball every other play.
Yep. But I just wonder if there's going to be a short leash for Jalen Hurts this year if he doesn't play well from the quarterback standpoint.
Yeah, I don't see them benching him this year, if that's what you're alluding to. But
But they have Kenny Pickett as his backup. Come on, man.
I'd rather put my grandma out there than Kenny Pickett. She might get more than one touchdown a game.
Is your grandma's hands bigger than 8 inches?
I don't know. I haven't measured them recently. All right. That's really all the news right now. We're kind of in a lull period. There hasn't been any trades yet. We do expect some trades in the draft during the draft. I don't think we'll see any pre-draft trades now because I think teams kind of want to see how the draft falls at this point.
Okay. Well, at this point, I guess we can move on to my wide receivers.
Yeah, this is kind of a robust position as you were saying.
Yeah, before the show, I was telling Jeff I did 30 wide receivers, and just to make it easier, I narrowed it down to 20. So there's guys on this list that I like. There's guys that I know that other people like that did not make my top 20. So
Whoa,
that's going to be interesting.
Spoiler alert.
Like,
so no,
I'll just say
no Marvin
notably,
Harrison on your list.
Yeah, he's definitely on it. Who didn't make my list, who shows up in a lot of people's top 15, is Devontae Walker out of North Carolina. I don't like him as a receiver. He drops the ball too much. I think he's just athletic and not a good receiver.
Are you
But I like
comparing
Drake
him to
May,
Quentin
and he let him
Johnson?
down. So sort of. I think sort of. But he actually tries to catch correctly. It just bounces off his hands. So
yeah, maybe Drake May should throw the ball a little bit better. I know it's your favorite quarterback in this draft, so I gotta harass you a little bit there. All right, what do we got coming in at number 20?
At number 20, I have Johnny Wilson out of Florida State. He is massive. He's 6'6". Some would say 6'7". He's actually, a lot of people think that he could end up being moved to tight end, which I could totally see because he's really huge. But I thought he shows a lot of promise on the physical standpoint to be a really good X wide receiver at some point. I think he's a little raw, and he played opposite of another guy there at Florida State we'll talk about a little bit later. And he also didn't benefit from having his quarterback play the entire year because his quarterback, Travis, broke his ankle. So didn't have a full season with the same quarterback. I think that he could probably be a mid-round pick. I'd probably say around 4th round in the draft. And depending on where he goes, he could end up being really good for you guys. I kind of liken his upside to Marcus Colston type, who was pretty successful with the Saints. His downside for me is probably Dorial Green-Beckham, and if you don't know who that is, that should tell you everything that you need to know. So he can go really anywhere between that. But the fact that he is 6'6" and he ran a 4.52 is pretty impressive. My next guy here is Javon Baker.
So he's a current wide receiver, right, Johnny Wilson? You keep referring to him as an X wide receiver.
All right, that's it. We're ending this right now.
Dad joke of the day. Dad joke of the day.
Yeah. I'm sure it won't be the only one.
Yeah, now I don't really like how they call that position now. Because if someone went around, like, if someone that didn't know about football was just listening in the locker room, he's an X wide receiver. He's an X. They think that he used to play that position.
Or maybe they're gonna think of it like X, like former Twitter. He's an internet wide receiver.
He is just an internet wide receiver, just like we're internet football players here.
Yep, that's right. I'm an internet scout, and I'll move on to number 19 here. Javon Baker out of UCF is 6'1". He's 202 pounds. He ran a 4.5 4.40, so that's used to be considered fast for a wide receiver. Not so much these days. I think that he has the ability to be a number three for a team right away, work his way up, potentially at some point be a number one or high number two. But he's not as polished as some other guys, and he went to a smaller school, so it's less likely that he gets high draft capital used on him. So I would say he's also in the fourth round range, maybe as high as the third round. We'll see how that goes in the draft, but he's certainly someone to keep an eye on. The next two for me, so 18 and 17, are both from the same school, which is Washington. So I have Jalen Polk and I have Jalen McMillan, both out of Washington. Jalen is 6'1", and the same with McMillan as well. But Polk is an outside player. McMillan is a slot player. And it's hard for me to put one over the other because they play differently, and both of them were overshadowed by Odunze, who's probably going to be in the top three of wide receivers taken in this draft. And before that, Puka Nacua was at that school as well. So they don't get the limelight. Since it's a vertical offense, I think Polk got more stats this past season, but I thought McMillan looked better on film. So if I'm looking for a slot player, I'm going to go with McMillan. I think he could go in the fourth or third round. Polk is someone that, depending on how teams look at him, some teams may like him more than others and might want him in the second round. But I see him more as a third round wide receiver. Both these guys could be contributors. Both these guys could start off as a wide receiver three, work their way up, maybe be a wide receiver two right away in the right system. I don't know. But I think that these guys are worth monitoring and probably third round rookie picks in Dynasty, I would guess. So we can move on to more West Coast guys here. And at number 16 for me is Brendan Rice. He's the son of Hall of Fame Jerry Rice, the best wide receiver in history until someone passes him up. Brendan's not as good as his dad at football, but he is fairly good. So he played with Caleb Williams, who's most likely going number one unless something crazy happens. And I think that he's someone that at his frame, he's 6'2", 208 pounds. Also ran a similar 40 to the last couple guys that we talked about here, 4.5 40. I think that he's someone that it's kind of not flash. He's not a flashy player. He's more of he does everything fairly well, but nothing stands out. But he's very well rounded. I think he's going to be a wide receiver too for a team out there. And to me, it's hard to pinpoint exactly who he reminds me of as a prospect. But I think that someone like Michael Wilson from last year is pretty similar to him. And I think that there are teams that are interested in him. I think your Panthers are one of the teams that are interested in him, maybe in the second or third round in this draft. So we'll see how that goes. But he's someone that I like. So
Right.
coming in at number 15 for me is someone who I've kind of struggled with where to pinpoint him. A lot of people like him more than me. Some people have him as high as number 4. I almost didn't even want him on my list, but I feel like talent-wise, I have to have him on here, and that's Troy Franklin out of Oregon. Troy Franklin he's a burner. He's a vertical guy, deep threat. He ran a 4.40 time, and he plays pretty fast too when you watch him on film. He somehow seems to teleport behind cornerbacks. He's just like running, and all of a sudden he's behind them, and you don't know how he got there. And sometimes you just see him slowly just merge through them and appear behind them. He's pretty smooth in that regard, and I think that he's going to help anyone in the vertical game. My issues with him is he's not very physical. He really struggles with the bigger, more physical corners. He struggles with contested catches when he's tightly covered. And that's something that's going to happen quite a lot in the NFL. So what you're looking at with him is he going to be able to beat corners that are the same speed as him? Is he going to be able to beat corners or safeties that play very physical with him? I don't think so. And I don't think he's ever going to be a number one, but I think he could be a really good number two wide receiver in the right situation. And I think that it's hard to ignore speed in general. I see him going in the second or third round. I would be shocked if a team took him in the first round. I know that a lot of people are higher on him than me. I just can't get there, but I can still see him being very usable in fantasy. He kind of reminds me of a Will Fuller type although I think he has better ball tracking skills than Will Fuller had. So I don't know if that sells it for you, Jeff, but as long as you know the potential downside, I think he's worth taking a stab at.
Yeah, absolutely. But is Deshaun Watson looking for his next Will Fuller?
I just think he already has so many wide receivers. I don't understand why they would continue to bring in more. You know what I mean? Like the Browns, what do they have? They have Cooper, they have Elijah Moore, they traded for Jerry Jeudy, they
Correct.
have Tillman, they
Bell.
Bell. How many more wide receivers do you need? It's obviously not their fault. It's quarterback play. So I think they should be done. But I wouldn't put it past them to go after more anyway. All right. I can move on here to my number 14, and that is Malik Washington out of Virginia. He's someone who keeps moving up and down my board. He is the smallest wide receiver in my list at 5'8.5" 5'8.5" but he is fairly stout for that size. He's a pounds, around 40 time. He's got decent sized hands, especially for someone of that size. To me, he's more of a slot guy, and he can move around, play from the outside, work his way in. I think he can do some vertical stuff, but to me, of any player I could think of, he kind of reminds me of a better version of Sterling Shepard, like the Sterling Shepard that we should have gotten if he stayed healthy. I think he could be kind of a utility slot guy for a team out there, and I think he's kind of underrated. I don't think he's in most people's top 15s, and I think he should be.
All right, that'll be interesting.
This next guy at 13, I guess 13 is a good number for him. He is kind of hard to pinpoint. He's bounced around from multiple teams. I think he was on 5 or 6 different teams, I want to say. Jermaine Burton, most recently out of Alabama. I think he has sky high upside. I think he absolutely has the talent to be some team's number one wide receiver, but I think he's got off the field issues, maturity issues, and I think that he needs some refinement in his route running and decision making. But man, this guy is talented. 6 foot, 6 pounds, ran a 4.45 40. I think he had a really high vertical as well. I think his play reminds me of George Pickens. I think he can be very explosive. He high points the ball really well. The only thing that's going to stop him is himself. So I think whatever team takes him, I'm going to be very interested in who the quarterback is, who the coaches are. Can he get in a structured environment, and can he thrive? And I think in the right environment, he could end up being a wide receiver one.
We will see there. Jermaine
All
Burton, I'm
right.
taking notes.
All right. So at number 12 for me, so we're getting to my top 12 here, is Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. I know he is a name that a lot of people are starting to talk about. And I think for me, he reminds me of a little bit stouter version of Trey Flowers from last year. I think he's got a little dog in him, as they say, and I think that he can play inside and outside. He is 5'10", so he's not massive, but 2 pounds on that frame, so that's fairly good. And ran a 4.56 40 time. I think that he's a very very good at the point of the catch. I think he makes his catch radius bigger than what it actually is, if that makes sense, defies physics in that regard. And I think that he's someone that's going to be a wide receiver too right away. And I think he's probably going to go to an offense that needs a second wide receiver to pair with whoever they already have. So I'm very curious where he would go. To me, I think a good team for him would be the Steelers or the 49ers or even the Chiefs. Some people compare him to Deebo Samuel. I don't think that he's quite to that level. I think Deebo is a unique player, and I don't think Corley is as fast. I don't think he has the after the catch running ability that Deebo has. But like I said, Deebo's special. But I can see him kind of in that vein. But for me, like I said earlier, he reminds me more of Trey Flowers. So, and I was really high on Trey last year. So I'm a fan of Malachi Corley, and I'll probably try to snatch him up. What in rookie draft, probably high third round pick is probably where he's going, maybe low second round pick. So I'll be targeting him there if I have the opportunity. So next guy here, and he's kind of in the same tier, is Xavier Worthy at 11 for me out of Texas. He is someone the draft community probably is more excited about than I am. He's on here for me mostly because of his speed. He, as a lot of you know, he broke John Ross's 40 40-time record. So he ran a 4. He plays very fast as well. For me, I think that the positives for him is he's very good after the catch. He was schemed that way with Texas, and for those of you who watch college football and saw some Texas games, you would know that Ewers isn't the strongest arm quarterback and underthrew the ball a lot, so they had to design the offense in a way to get wide receivers to get yards after the catch, and I think he did a really good job with that. I didn't really get to see that many downfield vertical shots because of the quarterback limitations, and I think that with a better quarterback in the NFL, he could probably be a better vertical player as well. So for him, it's really hard to pinpoint who he reminds me of because some people want to say Tank Dell. He's not Tank Dell. Some people want to say Devonta Smith, like the Eagles wide receiver. I don't think he's like either one of those guys exactly. I think to me, he's more of a Marquise Brown or maybe a Brandon Cooks type wide receiver. I think he could be very useful, and I can imagine, as we've talked about offline before, the Dolphins taking a stab at him in like the second round because they like fast wide receivers. Why not get a third one? So I could see him going there. I don't really think he could go in the first round. I would be surprised if he was. So second or third round is probably the sweet spot for him. But I think other people are higher than I am. I would say for me in rookie drafts, I'd probably take him in the second round. But I know people are going to take him the first. He's probably someone you are already familiar with, huh?
Yeah, I am familiar probably with all of the top 10 and most of the top 20 right now. I'll get a little more familiar with them once they go into my projection spreadsheet, which will be a lot of fun right after the draft.
All right. So now we can move on to the top 10. I believe this next guy is someone that you might be interested in, and that is Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. I see him as a second round pick in the NFL draft. He is 6'1", which is kind of surprising. I keep expecting him to be shorter than that, but he's 191 pounds. He ran a 4. He had a very fast 10-yard split. He's got decent sized hands. I think that he's going to be better in the pros than he was in college. I don't think that he had great college quarterback play. I think Florida doesn't have that great of coaching staff either. So I can see him being much more successful in the NFL. I'm very curious what team would take him. To me, again, he's one that's hard to find a comp for. The comparisons aren't that easy. And some people can be lazy, but to me, he plays like a young Adam Thielen who is much more athletic and much quicker. So I think that he could be somebody who develops into a top wide receiver 2, maybe even a wide receiver 1 for a team. And I would love to see him go to a team that needs a deep vertical threat or needs someone quick over the middle. I think he does both those well. So I could see reuniting with Anthony Richardson with the Colts. If the Colts pass on wide receiver in the first round, I could see him going to the Bills in the second round if they need a vertical wide receiver to replace Gabe Davis. So those are two spots that I would love for him to go. And he's one I'm going to keep an eye on in the draft because I'm very curious about him.
Yeah, would if the Chiefs took him, because Hollywood Brown's only on a 1-year deal, is that something that you could see as well?
Yeah, I could see that. That would probably be second or third round. But I mean, any wide receiver that the Chiefs take this year, I think everyone's going to have eyeballs on.
Absolutely, because we don't know what's going on with Rice, and Brown's on a 1-year deal.
So this next guy, I feel like I'm higher on than most people, and that's Roman Wilson out of Michigan. He's my number 9 wide receiver in this draft. He is mostly a slot guy, although I could see him being an all-around player at some point. He kind of reminds me of a mashup between Tyler Lockett and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't know if 100% if he has the upside for Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I can definitely see flickers of it. He is 5'10". He ran a surprisingly fast 4. He didn't get used that much in the Michigan offense, but they were run first offense, control the ball. So he's not going to have the high level production that some people rely on for their rookie prospects. I think that film wise, he's might even be better than the number 9 wide receiver in this class. I think you can make a case he should be in the top 6 or 7. I like him a lot, and if he goes to the right situation, he could be a number 1. I could absolutely see it. We've seen slot receivers be very successful in the league. The best wide receiver in the league is a slot wide receiver, and that's Justin Jefferson. We also have Amon-Ra St. Brown. We also have Keenan Allen. We also have CeeDee Lamb. Like, those are 4 of the top 10, maybe even 4 of the top 5, and they're all slot guys. So the pathway is there, the potential's there. I'm just very curious where he goes and if he gets paired with a good quarterback. All right.
That is always the question at this time of the year.
Yeah, we will see in less than a week.
Yes, sir.
So my next guy is Keon Coleman out of Florida State. He's someone that I wanted to get higher in this list, but I don't think he didn't test well, which is lowering him in a lot of people's eyes. But I still think that there are flashes on film where he played very well. He was paired opposite of Johnny Wilson, who I talked about earlier. They're both very tall wideouts. Keon Coleman is 6'3", 213 pounds. He ran a faster 40 time at his pro day than he did in the draft combine. Didn't have great quarterback play because his quarterback broke his ankle, but I think Coleman could be a better pro than college player. I think he's someone that could end up in the Shanahan offense at the bottom of the first round. I think that he could end up with Kansas City. There are places that he could go that he could immediately be very useful. And he's someone that if he goes to an offensive minded head coach is someone I'm probably going to take. If he goes somewhere else, I might pass and let someone else take him. But definitely someone to keep an eye on. Also, somewhat similar player, Xavier Legette is number 7 for me. He comes out of South Carolina. He was in college longer than Keon Coleman, and he only has 1 year of dominant production, and that was this past season. I don't exactly know what caused the late bloom, but he is very fast. He's very athletic. He ran a 4.39 40, and last year I think was the first year he had very solid quarterback play, and that was with a potentially low first, high second round quarterback. And I can't remember his name now. The number 7 guy on my board, Spencer Rattler. I think that Xavier Legette is definitely someone who's going to be a better pro than college player. I think he's going to go to a team that needs a legitimate number 1, and I think that he has the potential to do that. To me, he kind of reminds me of Rashee Rice, ironically enough, from last year. And I think that's I think that he could get drafted in the first round or high in the second. So you're looking at Baltimore, San Francisco, Kansas City. You're looking at Carolina. Those are teams that I could see drafting him. But like I said, he kind of reminds me of Rashee Rice and Keon Coleman, the guy I talked about before. Kind of reminds me of Dwayne Bowe. I don't know if you remember Dwayne Bowe from Kansas City days. You know when
I
they
do.
before they had our boy Mahomes.
Before Mahomes, before Tyreek.
Yep.
Did he play with Alex Smith or was it
I think he
pre-Alex
did.
Smith?
Yeah, because that was the bombs over Baghdad comment once Alex Smith got there. It's not like Alex Smith has the biggest cannon, and it's not like Dwayne Bowe was the fastest receiver, so that didn't make any sense, but whatever. All right, so we got 6 guys left. For me, these next 3 guys, I'm sure you can make a case for switching them around, but I have Ladd McConkey out of Georgia as the 6th wide receiver on my list. Another guy that ran a 4.39 40. He's almost 6 foot. He's about 5'11 and a half, 186 pounds. I thought he can play inside and outside. Too many people are comparing him to a Julian Edelman type, and I don't think that he's necessarily a slot guy. I think he's more of an outside receiver. I think he can also be a complete wide receiver. So to me, he's kind of a hybrid between Edelman and an outside receiver like Emmanuel Sanders. So I think he absolutely could be a number 1 for a team. And I think for me, a team that should take him is the Baltimore Ravens because they need someone to pair with Trey Flowers, and it's not Bateman. OBJ's now a free agent, and I just don't see anyone else on that team besides Flowers that's any good. So Ladd McConkey would be a good guy there. A lot of people I think are picking him for San Francisco. I think he also makes sense for Kansas City. I think he could even make sense for the Buffalo Bills. So I'd be very curious where he goes. I think end of the first round is probably likely for him. And I think that he goes in the middle of the first round for rookie drafts.
Absolutely.
So the next guy is a similar situation, and that is Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. I like him a lot more than his teammate Xavier Worthy. I think that Adonai Mitchell actually tested higher than Worthy at a larger size. So he's 6'2" and 205 pounds, but he ran a 40 time, which is pretty impressive. And I think that he tracks well on the field in college. The only thing for him, I think he's a well-rounded receiver that needs more polish and more refinement. And in college, he didn't get enough yards after the catch. That being said, the routes that he was running and who the quarterback was with Ewers, he wasn't being thrown in position to get yards after the catch. He was being thrown in a position where he had to catch it and either go down or try to fight against defenders. Whereas Worthy was thrown open more often and schemed open more often. And so his collegiate stats look better. I think Adonai Mitchell's the better pro prospect. And I would love for him to go to Buffalo. I think anytime I mock, I think I pick him for Buffalo. I think he would immediately step in for uh, the Diggs vacancy. So I would be very curious about that. To me, I don't know if you remember, but when Devontae Adams first joined the league, he was pretty raw,
He was.
and he developed into one of the top wide receivers in the league. I can see a similar pathway for Adonai Mitchell. And what's interesting is Adonai Mitchell is much more athletic than Devontae Adams was entering the league. So that's the closest that I could come up with for him. But again, that's upside.
You got to
So
have patience, though. That's the key there.
yeah, but I think he'll have some early success too. He to me with a 4.33 40 and a 200-pound build, 6 foot, almost 3. He kind of reminds me of Julio Jones a little bit. Julio Jones was extremely athletic and at the time very freakishly athletic, but was more of considered a vertical receiver and not very polished when he entered the league, and then ended up having what could be a Hall of Fame career. I think that obviously that's upside comparison. I think Brian Thomas Jr. could be down that path. That's certainly not guaranteed, but to me, there were times I thought he was potentially better than his teammate Malik Neighbors, but I think Malik Neighbors was more consistent. And ironically enough, I have Malik Neighbors right next to him as the wide receiver 3 in this draft class. And I think the top 3, just like 4 through 6, I think the top 3 can potentially be flip-flop depending on your preferences. But Malik Neighbors to me is more of a vertical guy and potentially can develop more of his over the middle and ability to move around in different routes and different positions. But I think he's going to be initially more of an outside receiver, vertical guy. But I think he's extremely talented. Some people compare him to Jamar Chase. I don't think he's quite as well rounded as Jamar Chase, but I think he's athletic, very talented. I think he reminds me more of a little bit taller, more polished version of Tyreek Hill coming out of college, because Tyreek Hill was an unfinished product until he spent some time with the Chiefs and finally developed a better game. I think Neighbors is starting off better than him, and I think that there are teams that are going to look at speed and they're going to want Neighbors and they're going to want Thomas, they're going to want Mitchell. There's a lot of speed in this draft, and I think that Neighbors could be potentially the first wide receiver taken, or he could be the third wide receiver taken, anywhere in between, depending on the teams that start that process. Him being number 3 is not a dig on him at all. He would have been the number 1 last year. He would have been the number 1 the year before that. Same with the other 2 guys. Maybe even the same with Brian Thomas, Adonai Mitchell, and Ladd McConkey. So it's not a dig on Neighbors at all. I just like my number 2 guy, Rome Odunze out of Washington, better because I think he is an all-around wide receiver and he's more athletic than people give credit. He ran a 4.45 40 at 212 pounds and a 6'2.5" frame. To me, Odunze, if Marvin Harrison wasn't here, Odunze would have been the prize of this draft. I think he reminds me of CeeDee Lamb a lot, even a Justin Jefferson type as well. I think he's pretty well rounded. I think he's an inside and outside player, and I would be thrilled to have him. There are teams that I think have him above Neighbors as well, and I think that the Giants are one of those teams that have him above Neighbors. I think most teams have the number 1, Marvin Harrison Jr., as their number 1 as well. And Marvin Harrison Jr., for me, I really don't exactly like the AJ Green comparison, but I can kind of see it. I just think he's more athletic than AJ Green, and I think he's more polished. So he's kind of like a hybrid between AJ Green and Larry Fitzgerald for me. But by no means do I think he's 100% perfect. I just think he's probably the most talented wide receiver of the last probably 10 plus years to hit the draft. And I think that he has more immaturity issues than most of the guys below him, too. So it's common for a wide receiver, especially a good one, to have diva like mentality. But I haven't seen a lot of it, just a little bit leading up to this draft. I think that people are going to rate him a little bit lower because he didn't test some of the crucial athletic scores. There were times last year where his quarterback play was so bad, it felt like he gave up on a couple plays that he didn't the year before when he had CJ Stroud throwing him the ball. So I think some people are going to not feel good about that and potentially consider taking one of the two guys below him. So either Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors over him. But I think that probably puts Marvin in a better team, better situation. So we'll see. I really like most of these guys quite a lot, especially the top 10. I really, really like those guys. Jeff, how do you feel about these rankings, and was there anyone that you weren't aware of previously?
So I had a whole bunch of mental notes, and some of them have escaped my brain. The one that stuck in my brain is you call Brian Thomas Jr. like a Julio Jones type wide receiver. So that means that I need to draft him this year in 8 seasons, trade you for multiple first round picks in a dynasty league,
It'll never
just as
happen
he's
again,
getting
Jeff.
towards the end of his
Never happen
career.
again.
And I heard you compare someone to like a Justin Jefferson type, and I just feel like that's like the
Rome
pinnacle.
Odunze. Rome
That's a
Odunze.
pinnacle assessment. And I do feel like it's a little bit disrespectful to say Harrison's the most talented wide receiver to come out in the last 10 years, because we do have Justin Jefferson, who might be one of the best wide receivers of all time. And obviously he needs to put more work into his actual body of work before we can say that, but it does seem like he's heading down that path right now.
Well, there's prospect scores, and then there's NFL results.
Yep.
And Jefferson was, I think, the fourth wide receiver taken in his draft class, because I think it was Ruggs, Judy, CeeDee Lamb, actually Raygor, and then Jefferson. So actually, he was a fifth. So obviously, not that many people view Jefferson as a generational guy. I am on record of saying I have friends who can back me up that I liked Jefferson the most because I watched that national championship game and I watched Jefferson make crucial catches. I'm like, this is the best receiver in this draft class, and I love Jefferson going into it. I was flabbergasted, especially Ruggs and Raygor. Those are just awful picks, awful, 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 awful picks. CeeDee Lamb almost could have been awful, but he definitely has recovered his value and looks good too.
Yeah, if this was an episode of Family Guy, there would have been a cutaway scene to you telling one of your friends 5 or 6 years ago about Justin Jefferson. We want to see the videotape evidence.
Before I've recorded anything. Hey, I've been wrong before too. I just really like
Never.
that LSU offense from that year. I liked Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson a lot.
Yeah. Your buddy Joe Burrow, though, has to get together this season and put a full season, probably even a full preseason of tape together this year.
He just has to not have an injury leading into the season.
It's bad because he limps that first month of the season, literally last year, but figuratively the year before that when he just had a gut surgery.
It's all right. This is the year that they probably still don't win the Super Bowl.
Yeah. That window is kind of open, but they're going through some turnover as that happens once the quarterback's finally paid. Same thing with the Bills. They're going through turnover.
Would you say the Bills or the Bengals are more likely to win the Super Bowl?
The Bills.
Really? With no wide receivers?
Yeah, I saw Patrick Mahomes do that last year.
Yeah, it's Patrick Mahomes.
I think Josh Allen's the closest quarterback to Patrick Mahomes right now.
But to beat Patrick Mahomes, you have to outplay Patrick Mahomes. And to outplay Patrick Mahomes, you have to have better wide receivers and better weapons than Patrick Mahomes.
Rookie Dalton Kincaid takes a leap forward, and Tyler Boyd's still out there waiting for a phone call from somebody because time's a ticking on him. Because if we get past the draft and he's not on a team, I can't imagine that he's on a team and contributes massively this year.
See, I think the Bengals beat the Chiefs like they do because they have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I think that makes a difference, and Bills don't have anyone like that right now. Until they get
We'll see.
Adonai Mitchell. No.
Right? I mean, they could go in multiple different directions too. There's Brandon Ayuk that's available. I've always dreamt in my brain to see DK Metcalf and Josh Allen kind of be a tandem together, because I just feel like that would just be such a sick tandem. It doesn't seem like it'll ever happen, but when he was unhappy a few years ago, I was like, this is the perfect time. Let's do it.
Would you rather have Brian Thomas Jr. or Adonai Mitchell?
Probably Brian Thomas.
And this is for the Bills, not for fantasy.
Yeah, both. Both. Yeah. I'm very confident that Brian Thomas is a first rounder. I'm not so sure about Adnan Mitchell. I think they're borderline towards the end of the first round, early second round. I think there's so many wide receivers this draft that I think that it's going to tank some of the value of these guys because they're going to be like, oh, we can just grab a guy in the second.
You make that case for quarterback. You make that case for offensive line this year too. So
yeah.
But I think that if there's a guy,
cream's going to rise.
I think that if there's a guy that you think is special, you have to take him in the first round. And I think for me, there's at least 6 guys that warrants being taken in the first round from the wide receiver position.
We will see. But that puts a bow on our rookie fantasy positions for 2020.
It sure does. And it also puts a bow on this episode. So thank all of you for watching and listening to this episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. And please like and subscribe and share this with all your friends so they can see how right I am about everything all the time. And we can grow and we can spread our wings and fly. Right now, Jeff wants to just fly away from this conversation, but really, every little bit helps, and we appreciate it.
All right. So as always, thank you for downloading, listening, and liking on our and commenting on our podcast videos. Please join our community by subscribing to us on the socials. Our handle on all platforms is at N2E We are also available on all major podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy. And until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Hi, everybody.